Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris. It's time for concerned Catholics in America to accept the reality that the Church in the United States is made in the image of Theodore McCarrick, not Jesus Christ. The rampant homosexuality within the clergy, the lies, the cover-up, the sacrilege, the financial malfeasance, the destruction of the faith, all of it has more than McCarrick's fingerprints on it. It has his seal on it. He certainly was not alone, nor was he the first, but he has proven to be the one who has been the most impactful. While there are many, the two major centers of the destruction were right here in Detroit under Cardinal John Dearden from 1958 to 1980, which produced the homosexual Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, and then New York under Cardinal Francis Spellman from 1939 to 1967, which gave the Church McCarrick. Together, Bernardin and McCarrick perverted the Church on every conceivable level, but McCarrick's influence has been the most pervasive and long-lasting. And when you consider the enormous damage inflicted on the Church by Bernardin with his vast number of episcopal appointments of homosexual men and his conniving to push reception of Holy Communion in the hand, well, that's really saying something. McCarrick had a head start on Bernardin and was decidedly more cunning and was communist trained in Switzerland in St. Gallen in the years immediately following World War II, a location he returned to frequently on a near annual basis for years. Although Bernardin was ordained 6 years before McCarrick, he was in many ways a backwater bishop until Dearden plucked him out of Atlanta as an auxiliary bishop in the late 1960s to head up what would become the feckless National Conference of Catholic Bishops. By that time, McCarrick was already on the fast track, having sprung from the loins of the extraordinary powerful Spellman. 2 years before anyone had ever heard of Bernardin, McCarrick had already ghostwritten the infamous Land O'Lakes document promoted by Notre Dame's Theodore Hesburgh, a document which sent the American Catholic University system into apostasy. Such was McCarrick's already burgeoning influence. The major difference between these two men is while both were sexually active homosexuals, McCarrick was communist trained, as Church militant broke 3 years ago. Bernardin's actions greatly contributed to the destruction of the Church in the U.S., but McCarrick's actions were intended to, and given the current state of affairs, the only fair and reasonable assessment has to be he succeeded. Take, for example, the issue of Holy Communion. Both men played central roles in destroying faith in the Blessed Sacrament among the laity. Bernardin rammed through a fraudulent vote in the 1970s with the bishops, which he used to lie to Pope Paul VI about to get Rome to approve Holy Communion in the hand. Church militant broke that news a number of years ago by uncovering all of it in the bowels of the USCCB archives stored at, where else? Notre Dame. But McCarrick, as usual, is already 10 steps ahead, further down the road, lying to the Bishops' Conference in conjunction with Wilton Gregory, a Bernardin offspring, reporting to his brother bishops in 2004 that Joseph Ratzinger had said it was okay to give Holy Communion to child-killing Catholic politicians. Ratzinger, who was then head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, had said no such thing. In fact, he had said just the opposite. But McCarrick, along with Gregory, simply lied to the rest of the bishops. And here we are today with the bishops still fighting this issue. McCarrick's evil is much more pervasive than Bernardin's, which again is impressive given Bernardin's homosexual romp through the Church with his bishop appointments. It was, for example, McCarrick who took charge of the bishop's response to the homo-predator clerical crisis, the first one, of which many there are, in 2002 to 2004, following the Boston Globe's Spotlight revelations. His response was pure deflection and deception. Not a thing changed or was implemented which would lessen the actual cause of the crisis, which was homosexuality within the clergy. But it made for great PR as McCarrick made the rounds of national media, expressing his shock and his dismay that such untoward evil could penetrate the heart of the church. And this, as he was sexually assaulting seminarians at his beach house on the Jersey Shore, bought and paid for by the church. McCarrick was instrumental in not only advancing sexual deviancy, but where he far outshined Bernardine was in his skill in fundraising, then using the money to subvert the church. He conned millionaire after Catholic millionaire with his Irish charm, all the way up to and including the Papal Foundation, and used millions in bribes to get his people in place and his own actions covered up. When Pope Benedict iced him, he just carried on, helping get Pope Francis elected, who then, almost instantly, dispatched him to Communist China to sell out the church there. He was instrumental in getting Blaise Supich and Joseph Tobin installed in Chicago, where Bernardine had built his gay network, which now extends far beyond Chicago, and Newark, where McCarrick used his influence to do the same back in the East. While Bernardine was extremely destructive, he was only on the public scene for about 25 years. McCarrick was on the scene for more than 50 years and possessed a much greater personal skill set, much more cunning and much more time to implement his plans, which of course he did. Which brings us to the point of this vortex. The current hierarchy, the bishops in the United States, especially the so-called good bishops, now must come to terms now with the reality that the church in America, as it is now constituted, was fashioned by two very powerful homosexual men, both perverts, with one in particular hell-bent on the church's destruction. That's what they have given us. Through these men's power and influence and ability to blackmail, sideline, and appoint virtually at will other men after their own design, the architecture was put in place to ensure there is no coming back from this unless in the very near future what few remaining bishops with a conscience step forward and take control of the narrative. These men need to understand they were selected for seminary, entered into a system that was designed to produce weak men, weak leaders. Whatever you may think of yourselves when you look in the mirror, Your Excellencies, know that you are in your office largely because you either slipped through the cracks or were viewed as not a real threat. Even if you are personally orthodox in your own religious belief, you have been brought up in a system on purpose to discourage you from exercising any real pushback against evil. You've had your minds conditioned for decades by a system designed by two homosexual predators, one of them a communist, to not fight back, to strip you of your masculinity, to always think in terms of compromise and going along and avoiding confrontation at all costs, of never rocking the boat, to think in terms of dialogue and tolerance and never acting decisively, stepping out where you need to in defense of the people of God, never doing that. More than the perversion of the faith itself in so many seminaries is the perversion of your masculinity. That is the real secret of McCarrick's success and control over the church in America. This is how such deviants have seized control across the entire spectrum, because you who know of their evil, have been neutralized, with Supich's presence being the latest example of what strikes terror in all your hearts. Every one of you good bishops and archbishops watching this, you know what I'm saying is true. You may not like it. You probably don't like me. You cringe when someone says church militant, but you know what we say here is true. Just look around the condition of the church right now. It's mass apostasy because of the apostasy of the clergy. Why has Church Militant been able to encourage more than 1,300 people to travel to Baltimore in November and sit out in the cold for hours to pray for you? Quick aside, those roughly 1,300 reservations in about a week's time represent almost half the total capacity of the pavilion right next door to where all of you are meeting. And there are still 4 months to go. For those of you interested on reserving a seat, click on the provided link to save your spot for what is shaping up to be a total watershed moment in the life of the church in America. So here's what Church Militant would like to propose to you good bishops. First, we know you feel alone and isolated. never backed up, at least publicly, by your brother bishops, under constant threat from Cupich and his influence. We also know you are deeply concerned, rightfully so, that if you do anything public that Cupich perceives as threatening enough, you fear he will end you and bring your good work in your diocese to an end. That said, the current state of affairs simply cannot be allowed to continue, especially for some future promise down the road. We are quickly approaching the end of the institutional church in America. So given that, we are aware that you all watch Church Militant, you pass around relevant Vortex episodes, and you have private, quiet discussions amongst yourselves about what we talk about here in Vortex, as well as our articles and our other shows and so forth. We know it, we can skip over it. Got it. We know this because you communicate this to laymen who trust you, who are every bit as concerned about this abomination we find ourselves in as a church. What we'd like for you to do, and we know who you are, and we know that you know that we know who you are, is to reach out to those laymen who are mutual friends of you guys and us, and through them, reach out to us and allow us to help strategize with you in standing up and pushing back against this evil. We're not interested in any way, manner, form, or anything of making this a story, revealing any details, writing about it, doing Vortex episodes about it, or anything of the kind. It is a strictly private endeavor between Catholic laity and their shepherds to finally push back against this evil rot which has taken control. In all forthrightness, some or all of you may in fact lose your diocese in the end. That's true. There's no getting around that. But there needs to be a coordinated effort, a grand plan. And some of you bishops know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about the plan. We have loads of information, and you do too. We have a network we established in the spring of hundreds of priests around the nation we call the New Catacombs. Many of these priests know an awful lot about an awful lot. Our Church Militant Resistance has literally thousands of members across the country, many in chanceries who are likewise know an awful lot about an awful lot. All of them stand willing to do whatever is necessary to come to the aid of Holy Mother Church and back you up. Church Militant has been marshaling these forces, laity, faithful clergy, information, reams of information for years now. And we want to meet with you to let you know what we know. I know many of you don't like us, or you're suspicious of us, or leery and so forth and all that. You don't like our tone and so forth. We are out there. Yep, that's absolutely true. But it's out of a deep love for our blessed Lord and His bride. No other reason, and the question of tone and being out there, that's really a subjective one. No one else is saying what needs to be said, including you, with all due respect, most especially you. We want to help you, encourage you, do whatever is needed. As we said, we are mindful that you may very well get mowed down if you go on the offensive, to which we'd like to conclude with two thoughts then. First, had the young men who first stormed ashore at Normandy or parachuted behind the lines not been willing to die, and many of them did, Europe would not have been freed from the Nazis. Death is not the greatest evil. Not dying with honor in the service of the church is the greatest evil, and you go to hell for it. Secondly, a joint effort to seize back the church in a great act of charity for the faithful in the face of near certain retribution would be an act that even if you are mauled in the process, you, bishops, the Holy Spirit would use that absolutely because it is an act perfectly in accord with the divine will. Turning back the lies, the liturgical abuses, the wanton sacrilege, the destruction of the faith, the financial rot, all of it. Standing up to it out of love. How could that be anything other than pleasing to the Blessed Trinity? Ask yourselves in consideration of what we are proposing. Is this something that Satan would oppose? So please, you know who our mutual friends are. Contact them. Have them be the go-betweens if you're afraid or nervous about Church Militant. I assure you, you have nothing to be afraid of concerning us. Our entire 15 years has been out there for all the world to see that every action we do is born strictly from a love of our blessed Lord, His Holy Mother, and the one true faith. nothing else, to be used to help save souls. The forces of evil in the church are well organized. We need to be more so. God love you. I'm Michael Voris.